bigger. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Backyard Bass, and today we are going to talk a little bit about jigs. Just two jigs in particular that I use. I'm not going to go into the entire jig spectrum there. It's all over the place. There's a bunch of different types of jigs, stuff like that. We can do that in a later video, and I'll explain a little bit more about that. But today we're going to talk about the bigger size jigs. This is actually I think it's a 3/4, yeah, it's a 3/4 ounce, just football head jig. You can kind of see there. Just this is more of a cheaper PB&J color, but it's kind of like a big mop jig. I do like throwing this thing for like offshore stuff, a little bit deeper water. It gives a little bit bigger presentation that I really like. And then the other jig is actually just a finesse jig. This is something that I was using yesterday at a tournament, and this is kind of what I was getting a lot of my bites on. I started off with a normal size jig like this, and I got a few bites here and there, but it wasn't nothing great. You know, they weren't really holding on to it or nothing like that. So I went down to the finesse jig, and that actually made a pretty big difference. The only time I'm throwing a finesse jig is typically more towards like the late summer months, you know, when you get into the dog days of summer, something like that, and I want to downsize a little bit, you know, that's when I go to the finesse jig. Now, saying that, there's two different types, or there's two different ways that I actually use both of these. Okay, I'll put them down, and they're going to have to do with the trailers. So, these are two different trailers I've got right here. You can see this is just the Havoc bait here. It has no flanges on them tips, nothing like that. There's not a whole lot of action. It's more of a dead action. When this thing falls, you know, they might wave back and forth just a little bit. And the other one is actually the Vial Crawl. Now you can see on that one, it's got the big flanges on it. This thing's got a ton of action to it. So, with that being said, when I first start off, I always go with more action. Usually it gets your little bit more aggressive fish to lash out and bite it really quick. Or even if you're sitting on the bottom and you've still got the flapper sitting there going back and forth, a lot of times that'd really get those fish aggravated and get them to bite sometimes. But if I get to the point to where I'm throwing the bigger jig or I'm throwing the finesse jig and I'm not getting either one of those to get bit on a whole lot, and I know there's a good jig bite going on, that's when I get rid of that one that has all the action. I go to something more like this. Another one is the Missile D-Bomb. It's got two flappers on it. They're just flat. They don't have a whole lot of action. But that and this one are the two ones I go with, just to kind of deaden that jig a little bit. And I know that sounds kind of crazy because you're throwing a jig in the first place to try to get a reaction bite out of those bigger fish because it's a bigger profile. But when you downsize to that finesse jig and start using something with a little bit more deader action to it, it sits down there, and I let it set probably twice as long as I would something with a lot of action. With something with a lot of action, I'm going to move a lot and hop a lot. When I go down to something like these on the deader trailers, I tend to leave it set for probably 2 or 3 seconds each time, because in fish, a lot of times what happens is they'll be setting by cover or something like that, and they'll watch it come by them, and they don't do nothing. But if you let it set for a few seconds, a lot of times they'll go over there and they'll pick it up because they're curious about it, but they're not actively feeding. So just something to keep in mind there. One thing I will tell you, when you're fishing, let's just say the big jigs right now. Anyway, anything from, I'm going to say, a ½ ounce and up. I typically always either go with 17 or 20-pound fluorocarbon on these. That's just enough to keep up with that jig and that weight. It's not any problems. You can even go to like a braid if you want to, you know, if you want to do something like that. But on the finesse jigs, remember, you got this heavy wire hook on the big jigs. On the finesse jigs, you got a little light wire hook. So you want to match that. You want to downsize your line. You want to go down to probably a 12-pound fluorocarbon or maybe even 10-pound. A lot of times on these, what I usually typically stick with is a 12-pound fluorocarbon. So if you start getting over that, a lot of times what's going to happen is you're just going to bend that hook out. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to show you this. If you look at that hook right there, it's completely bent out. And that's exactly what happened. I was throwing it on one of my other rods. I wasn't even paying attention. I just happened to pick one up and tie it on, and I had 17-pound fluoro on it. And when I hook set on the fish, it fought. I got it in fine. It was no problem at all. It wasn't even that big of a fish, maybe 2 pounds. And time I got to looking at it, that's what happened. So remember to match your line size to your jigs or any bait you're using for that matter. It does make a big difference. If you got light wire hooks and you're using 17 and 20-pound fluorocarbon or mono or whatever braid, anything, you're gonna stretch them hooks out and they're not gonna work real well for you. So you've got to have a reel that's going to give a little bit. You have to have a line that's going to give a little bit. Don't overpower your baits. So thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and that like button. The channel's growing pretty good, so hopefully we can keep that going. We are going to do the live streams on Monday evenings at 7 o'clock. So hopefully I'll see you guys there. And if you guys have any questions or anything, leave them down in the comments. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.